All right, welcome out. Here we are after multiple technical difficulties. We're moving on. We're on chapter 11. This one is relatively brief. So we should, I don't want to promise anything, but we should be able to get through this through one go through, okay? Uh, we're a little over halfway. As I said before, we're probably not going to do all the chapters. We'll see how it goes. But it's been a long, arduous journey, anyways. But critical thinking is a long, arduous skill to build. It takes some time, takes some crafting, takes some effort. All right. Anyways, so let's go. Argumentation theory and critical thinking. Theory of argumentation is a philosophical school that primarily studies the form of arguments. What should count as an argument, the relationship between argument form and content, and realization used as argument. All right. Between some of this is relatively abstract, and I remember, when I was in college, and professors would start talking about things such as argument is between relationship between form and content. What does that mean? Well, we'll get into that. The field of argumentation is often taken to include debate, persuasion, conversation, dialogue, and even propaganda as forms of argument. It emphasizes a specialized conception of logical reasoning seen from the perspective of premises and conclusions. Uh, these United States, and again, as I mentioned before, pretty soon we'll have our July 4th, our birthday, and it will be the 250th celebration, right? Um, that's that's pretty good, considering that at the outset, many, even those who set up the country, the founders, I should say, um, they weren't sure how long it was going to last. I mean, right off the bat, you had the British attacking off the coast with all their ships and their cannons. After they saw the Declaration of Independence, let the cannon fire begin. So that that was a problem. How to get through that. That was a very difficult, arduous time. Then the War of 1812, and just keeping with Civil War. It looked like at that point, again, the country was not going to make it, right? Many doubted it. But here we are, 250 years later. So, uh, one of the best places to use critical thinking is in a free country where you have the greatest freedoms and liberty. We are at liberty to allow ourselves uh, to argue, to debate, persuade, converse. Uh, Unfortunately, it takes two or more than one. You can't do it by, well, maybe you can do it online in a blog or something or a podcast, but inevitably you're going to have to engage people. That's how this country works. That's how our society, our government is set up. It's for engaging. So preferably, it's about keeping level-headed, allowing, not shouting down, and you see way too much of this shouting down hate and spite and attacks online and off. People don't want to engage in conversation. They just want to do the Jerry Springer hit you upside the head my way or the highway, right? Type of argumentation. That's not arguing. That's bullying, right? So you want to remain calm. You want to remain open and accepting of difference, right? Whenever you're arguing or debating. So that's at the foundation. It emphasizes a specialized conception of logical reasoning seen from the perspective of premises and conclusions, right? So what is a premise? Um, and here's an interesting point. I should highlight this whole thing, right? Argumentation theory tends to focus on premises and conclusions and thought, which we can connect with the elements of reasoning on establishing who holds the burden of proof in an argument and on how best to assess an argument, though not necessarily in keeping with ethical principles, right? So if you are on the attack and you say, well, you as an individual or your group or your party or whatever, it's not working because, so if you bring up or force the argument, you have to bring to bear the burden of proof. So you have to prove what you're talking about, right? And you can't just shout people down, scream them down, right? That's not arguing. That's bullying. And there's no reason for it. It doesn't get anyone anywhere. There's no solutions. Nobody's ever convinced or at least brought to an understanding. People oftentimes think that argumentation is that I will win this person over. They'll be totally convinced to my way of thinking and join my club, my group, right? That's not it. Argumentation is really you've got something to say. You just want to put it out there, and you want people to go, oh, well, that's interesting. Let me consider that, right? So if you've done that, then you've done your job as someone who's arguing, right? So it's not about completely convincing. It's about opening up a space in somebody's head or heads or in their head to allow in your thoughts, your angle, your perspective. And then the person, if you've done your job, I don't want to say won the argument. That's not the point. That's not the point. If you've done your job, if you've enabled that person to reasonably understand what you're talking about, that's all you're trying to do, right? And then you go from there. Because trying to convince somebody in the moment to completely overlook and forget about their opinion or perspective and just come to your side, hook, line, and sinker. I'm all in. Forget all that stuff that I believed for years. You got me, right? No, that's not how it works. Okay, so anyways, these structures are what? A set of assumptions or premises, which may also be information and a conclusion that may or may not follow from the premises, and methods for assessing the logical relationship between premises and conclusion, right? So you can take you can take individual argumentation classes. This is argumentation within critical thinking. Probably the best thing to do is take a critical thinking course first, and then take an argumentation class, because critical thinking is at the foundation of the logic and the techniques you need in order to argue well. This is, of course, only a cursory look at some of the key components in conversational argumentation theory, but this introduction gives us a beginning place for considering the relationship between critical thinking and an expedient, everyday concept of argumentation. Yeah. So there you go, right? This is just an introduction. So if you really want to be able to understand argumentation more and do it better, then you need to take an entire course, right? Or read an entire book on it, right? Get into it more. Some background questions you should consider. To what degree should argumentation theory be the focus of your learning? Great questions. Remember to keep this text in context, that it is geared towards the college student, right? It is geared toward the student. Thus, these questions, right? What does it add, if anything, to the concept of critical thinking laid out in this book? In comparison with other things you might learn to take command of your reasoning, how important is argumentation theory? To what degree have we already encompassed argumentation implicitly as implied, all right? Or if at all in the book? How does argumentation connect with the elements of reasoning, intellectual standards, intellectual virtues, and barriers to criticality. There's a lot there. Again, just bear with me. We'll work through this patiently, one point at a time. To develop a concept of argumentation useful for everyday life. See, there it is. That's the key word. Again, my teaching, my coaching, my very existence is about what do most people need most of the time in most situations. It's about the practical need. It's not about I love a particular course or discipline, and I love Shakespeare, so I'm going to teach Shakespeare. You should love it too. It's critical to society. Well, it's not, right? Some courses are much more critical to everyday use for most people than others, right? Physics, great. Science, great. Math, great. But not applicable to the majority of people, the people's needs, the average person's, the needs of the average person. And then people will say, yeah, but we use math and science all the time. Yes, inadvertently, right? We may be using science or science, the effects of science and the laws of science swell about us all the time. The law of gravity, the law of matter, law of motion, all these laws exist around us all the time. But are we continuously and constantly aware of them, pointing them out and discussing them and referring to them? And no, we're not, right? Same thing with mathematics. Most of the math that most of us do is very simple, rudimentary, right? And even if you work in a math-oriented field, an engineer, accountant, architect, whatever, designer, right? You're not using scratch paper, right? You're not using an abacus, or you're probably using a calculator, but you're probably using apps these days more than anything else. So there's a lot of math going on underneath what we use, right? In the algorithms we use, in the programs we use, our phones and our computers. Most of that most of the math going on, we don't see it on the user's end or deal with it or even think about it much. We have a user interface, right? You can thank Stephen Jobs. I think it was Stephen Jobs, right? Actually, Ed Wozniak, the main designer of the first PC and subsequent PCs. And it's that graphic user interface. He didn't, in the early days of computers, you used to use toggle switches. You had to be a real nerd, right? Or then there were entries you would have a screen, but you would have to make entries at the cursor, enter the code in order to get the computers to work. But now the code works underneath that graphic user interface as we click and drag and drop and do all that, right? Anyways, that's another, I don't know, maybe that's another video, another thing to talk about. To develop a concept of argumentation useful for everyday life, we might begin with basic definitions of argumentation, right? Find a good dictionary. The action or operation of inferring, what does that mean? A conclusion from propositions premised. Oh my goodness, what is all that, right? Methodical employment or presentations of argument, logical or formal reasoning, interchange of argument, discussion, debate, a sequence of chain of arguments, a process of reasoning, right? To infer is kind of to guess. So I've listened to what you've had to say, and from what you have to say, I can infer that what you mean is, right? Of course, a proposition is a proposal. It's right in the root of that word, right? What's your proposition? Well, I am propositioning that, proposing, I should say, propositioning. Sounds like something else. I am proposing that blah, 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 Oh, I see. So what I can infer from your proposition is this, and then your premise is from which you come from, right? What is your premise? What is your logic based in? What are your facts and all that good stuff, right? Since argument is a root term in the word argumentation, we should also consider a definition of argument relevant to our discussion. So, and then the question goes back to do we all need critical thinking and argumentation? Probably more, some people more than others, right? For sure, right? Depending on their their careers, their profession, and what their downtime to, I don't know. But if you have to build your life, if you have to find someone to share your life with, a partner, don't you have to logic it out? I propose that I probably need someone who will love me, someone who is self-sacrificing, someone who would love children, someone who would love my perspective on theology, philosophy, work, downtime, work time, all that stuff, right? So you kind of have to logic it out. So you're using critical thinking and reasoning, and if you're not arguing with others, you're arguing with yourself or trying to reason with yourself using reasoning, right? What do I propose? What do I propose for a partner? What do I propose for my life, partner, career, political leanings, religion, if I want to be religious in any way, shape, or form, right? All that stuff. A statement or a fact advanced for the purpose of influencing the mind, a reason urged in support of a proposition. Pulling these definitions together, I like that, pulling them together. We can view argumentation as either a debate in which reasons are typically given for one side by each party. And sometimes you're debating yourself, right? Aren't you? Right? What major should I take? You got to debate yourself first before you start asking other people. What do you think? What do you think my major should be? Or a context in which someone, either verbally or in writing, is giving a reason or reasons for or against a given position. Based on what you have already learned, you should readily see the importance of critical thinking to an everyday life conception of argumentation, one based not in specialty language, but in commonplace concepts. There you go. That's good, right? You're usually trying to. What did Einstein say about that, right? If you really understand something, it should be simple. You should be able to understand it in your own mind simply, right? Using commonplace concepts and realities, right? But even if it is complex, you should still, in order to communicate it to others, break it down to its simplest terms, right? I was watching a Netflix documentary on Abraham Lincoln, and he was a great communicator. They call, who was it, Reagan, the great communicator. But one of Lincoln's main attributes or skills was his ability to break things down, even the most complex concepts or heated topics, into simple terms, right? That people could see clearly and logically, right? Using commonplace concepts and realities. Kind of folksy type of guy. Kind of like, if you are a Christian and you read the New Testament, Jesus would do the same thing with his stories, right? Anyways, when understood deeply, that sounds like critical thinking. Argumentation entails use and understanding of elements of reasoning, intellectual standards, intellectual virtues, and obstacles to good thinking. For instance, whenever an argument is made, it entails not only premises, assumptions, and information, right, and conclusions, inferences, as is the focus of traditional argumentation theory, but also other elements of reasoning, purpose, question, point of view, concepts, and implications. So there's a lot there, right? So first and foremost, argumentation entails premises, right? A premise. What is your premise? What are these assumptions? If you say, global warming is at a crisis level, right? What are your assumptions? What are you assuming? What's the information? Can you give us enough background and understanding using common sense everyday terms? And I've done this. I've done that for my clients. And if you look at what is going on with global warming and why it's an issue, and trying to understand uh, just the basics of global warming, it's there's more there than meets the eye. I can I'm not going to put any money on it, but I can almost guarantee most people don't know enough about global warming to really understand what's going on, right? You have to understand what's causing it, uh, right? Not carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Is carbon dioxide bad? No, I'm letting it out right now, right? Um, when plants die, they release carbon dioxide. When we breathe, carbon dioxide carbon dioxide is released. Carbon dioxide is involved in photosynthesis, so it's good to make things green. So it doesn't sound like a bad thing, right? Well, it's not bad. It's not about the current cycle. It's not about CO2 in the current cycle, but coming from past cycles into the current cycle. How about that one? Do you know that? Right? Because allegedly, when you burn fossil fuels, you release CO2 that is dormant in the ground that comes from another cycle, right? A past cycle. So that's the problem. And if you add too much of that to the environment, it causes problems in the ozone, in the upper and lower atmosphere, right? At the poles, it causes holes at the poles, and we've got the cool air coming coming through there, right, or being released there. But most of the rest of the planet is you've got that uh, what do you call it? Things where you keep the flowers, the something something effect. I can't think of the term right now. It's escaping me. But anyways, a glass house. Where do you keep flowers and plants? That's not going to do. My brain is not working in that capacity right now. Where's my assistant? Anyways, but greenhouse effect. I'll be okay. See, because greenhouse traps the heat and the light, right? That's what you want to do. You want to grow those plants, so you want to keep as much heat and light trapped in the greenhouse as possible, so that you can grow what you got in there. So that's what happens. The heat gets trapped in the rest of the planet, right? And the trapping of that heat causes uh, weather problems, right? Um, you allegedly start to get more tornadoes, more storms, more issues in regards to climate, right? Climate issues, rising of oceans occur, and so forth and so on. But anyways, but you can see. So anyways, if I was going to argue about um, global warming, I don't want to say climate change because climate's changing all the time, so that's kind of a misnomer. It's actually global warming that's the issue. So see how I'm using critical thinking? Going going the distance, going through the layers to really get to the core of what's going on, right? Um, Getting to the core of the premise, right? So then and there's even more to the global warming issue than that which I've already given you, right? There's cost. How many billions or trillions of dollars are going to be needed to be spent to what effect? It's totally going to take care of things. It's only going to take care of 10%, 5%, 3% of things. I don't know. Is the United States the only country that's going to spend the money? Other larger populations such as India and China, which have a billion plus people in each country, right? And we're only 340 million, right? So it's good if we do something, but the rest of the world has to chip in. You see what I'm doing? So it's becoming much more involved than most people want to go or have the time for. They would prefer just to scream and scream at you. You know, you're anti-climate warming crisis. You're an idiot. You know, shut them down, shut them off, shut them out, throw them out the door, ignore them, get them out of here, right? Instead of really, and probably one of the reasons why they do that is because they don't know enough themselves and they can't discuss it in detail and in depth and really work to come to solutions rather than one-upsmanship. You know, I'm just going to try to beat you. That's not the point. The point is trying to find a conclusion and to discuss and look at all possibilities and alternatives. If you look at climate physicists, and I'm not going to go to engineers who pretend that they're climate scientists or other scientists who don't study the climate, but climate physicists go to the primary source, the essential source, right? Climate physicists say that there's a myriad. What does myriad mean? Look that up, right? A large number of inputs into climate change, of which humankind is only one of those inputs. So they say that there is no crisis, there's no need for alarm. And if you're not aware of that, then go to the annual climate conference. I think they meet annually, or at least they used to, and listen to what they're saying at that conference, right? And that's what they're saying at that conference. There is no cause for alarm. There is no crisis. So, and why do some people believe that there's a crisis? Well, that's because there's some groups who can really profit off the crisis, right? Money, power, and influence, of course, you know, and that's why it's political. It's highly political. It's highly politicized, right? So there you go. So that's a good start right there. If you're going to discuss, if you're going to argue for or against, what's your premise? What's your conclusion, right? So my conclusion is we don't know. That's my conclusion, right? Even climate scientists, physicists, right, say that they don't really know, you know, the half of it. To what degree do humans have an influence over climate and the climate, the warming of the climate, right? They're not even sure of that, right? Okay, so anyways, assumptions, conclusions, what also other elements of reasoning, purpose, what's your purpose? There you go. So with many of these arguments, sometimes the purpose is just I'm going to win. I'm going to knock you down. I'm going to get you, right? I'm going to make you look a fool, and I'll win. And that, you know, is that a good reason for arguing? Usually not. You know, if you're 12 years old, fine, but if you're an adult, probably not, right? What is your purpose? What are your questions? Point of view. There you go. A lot of people say that if you're on the left, you're pro climate warming, you believe it's the crisis issue, and on the right, no, it's not. And then there's somewhere in the center. I don't know where I line up, probably more in the center. Concepts in place. Further, we need a broad array of intellectual standards to judge the reasoning and any argument, including depth, breadth, and fairness. Ooh, there we go. Pop those in there. Which are not typically emphasized in traditional argumentation theory. For example, we need to ensure that we are considering all relevant viewpoints and working through all important complexities in the issue. See what I just did? That's what I just did. I didn't work through all of them. There's still more, right? And I can almost guarantee you, I'm not gonna put any money on it, but I can almost guarantee you that most people, if not the majority, don't know the half of it in regards to climate change, and you know, funnel down using critical theory or thinking funnel down far enough, deep enough, and wide enough, right, to really understand the issue and to be able to talk about it intelligently, thoroughly, with great patience, ethics, morals, purpose of solution over purpose of winning or gaining financial, political power, right? If argumentation is complex with an ethical dimension, we need intellectual virtues such as, oh, here it is. This is great. I don't know why I didn't highlight this. Such as intellectual empathy, integrity, fair-mindedness, to reason objectively through the argument. There you go. Right? These days, that's hard to do, to be honest. Right? How many people are too lazy to do that or to do the research that's needed to be done, right? In order to really discuss something intelligently, to see the point of view instead of just going, "Oh, you're of that opposing party. You're idiots. You're to be shouted down and to be ostracized and outcast, right? Just go away. You know, don't come near us. Don't talk to us. Don't live near us. Don't engage, right?" But you'll probably find on both sides of the argument good points, right? And probably good people to the greatest degree. But then people get mad and they get all of this oppositional mindset and they just want to crush each other. It's pathetic. Anyways, analyzing and assessing argumentation, general guidelines. Many arguments are ill-defined, distorted, or focus on selfish or vested interest. And that's kind of what I was talking about, right? To keep high quality reasoning at the forefront of your thinking while you're asserting, developing, assessing, or defending arguments, use the following guidelines. This is good, right? So you want to do that, right? High quality reasoning at the forefront, right? One, all arguments have a fundamental purpose and goal, right? Purpose goals within the argument should be clearly stated, as I was trying to do with my climate issue or global warming issue. All parts of the argument should be relevant to the purpose. All argumentation purposes should be realistic and significant, ethical, and justifiable. Right? You don't want to start just making stuff up, lying, throwing things out there that sound good and support your point or your side of the argument, but aren't valid. Right? That's unethical. You don't want to do that. It's done for sure, but ultimately you don't want to be there. We don't want people to be there because there's too much gaslighting, which is just saying something over and over again if it's true or not, and people start to believe it, right? And I think that's how people got out of control in regards to understanding or not understanding the depths of the problem with their issues with global warming. Right? All arguments address a fundamental question, problem, or issue. The fundamental question at issue at the heart of the argument should be clearly, precisely stated. Related questions should be articulated, distinguished. All parts of the argument should be relevant to the central question. All arguments should focus on realistic and significant questions. All questions being addressed by the argument should define clearly stated intellectual tasks that, once fulfilled, will settle the question, right? Again, this is asking a lot. You're asking people to be very thorough. You're asking people to work hard at it. You're asking people to not have an agenda, to put the gun down, put your weapons down, put your hate down, right? It's tough to do. Being a good critical thinker and someone who argues well, it's very difficult to do. Not easy, right? All arguments identify data, information, and evidence relevant to its fundamental question and purpose. So that's what I was trying to do with the climate change sorry, global warming issue. Everybody's talking climate change. It's stuck in my brain. All information used should be clear, accurate, relevant to the bottom of the question. Information gathered must be sufficient to settle the question at issue. Information contrary to the main conclusions of the argument should be responsibly dealt with or explained. No information relevant to the argument should be left out, ignored, or distorted to fit a given position or perspective, and so forth, right? So again, I am not here this is not a course in which I'm going to teach you this stuff very thoroughly. If you want to learn this stuff, then take my course, and it's 17 weeks. And even a 17-week course, I can't finish this book in 4 months. I can't do it. Probably need a good year just to be pretty thorough with it, and then probably another year to study it, to give it its just due, or just desserts. Is that the word I'm looking for? To give it the necessary time that is needed in order to really work the critical thinking technique, right? All arguments contain inferences or interpretations by which conclusions are drawn. All arguments should be clear, accurate, relevant to the key question issues. Conclusions drawn in the argument should not go beyond what the data imply. Yep, stick to the point. Conclusions should be consistent and reconcile discrepancies in the information. Conclusions should explain how the key questions at issue have been settled. All arguments are conducted from some point of view or frame of reference, right? All points of view relevant to the argument must be recognized, if not clearly articulated. Good luck with that. Some people, again, they just want to do the Jerry Springer chair over the back of the head, upside the head. Yeah. No. That's not right. Shut up. Be quiet, go away. Right. Objections from competing points of view must be identified, fairly addressed. Keyword fairly. No relevant point of view is to be ignored or distorted. Again, this is all hard to do. Good luck with that, right? As they say. All arguments are based on assumptions. Clearly identify and assess major assumptions in the argument. Explain how the assumptions shape each point of view in the argument. All arguments are expressed through and shaped by concepts and ideas. Assess for clarity key concepts in the argument. Assess the significance of the key concepts in the argument. Note how different perspectives use or see concepts differently, or how they use different concepts to defend a position. All arguments lead somewhere if taken seriously, right? Trace the implication and consequences that follow from the argument. Search for the negative as well as positive implications. Consider all significant implications and consequences of the argument. And then as I was reading this, I saw this, right? Egocentric, sociocentric, right? Finally, we need to understand how egocentric and sociocentric pathology stand in the way of our ability to make reasonable arguments and to accept reasonable arguments that may go against our set of beliefs, right? That's it, right? So people have been believing something, maybe it's climate change, or maybe it's a political issue, or maybe you have belief in a particular religion or a socio-political issue or whatever, and you believe that, not just for a year or two, but maybe 5, 10 years. You're steeped in that tradition. Your family's steeped in that tradition. Your your parents are there, and then their parents are your grandparents, great grandparents. So how deep does this go, right? So if you're arguing to somebody about something, how entrenched are they? And some are more entrenched than others, and the less entrenched they are, actually the best critical thinkers are not entrenched, right? They're generally open, generally speaking, they're generally open to changing their point of view. Because as Einstein said, or Stephen Hawking, I think maybe it was Stephen Hawking, that's one of the things I love about science is that it's very so open-ended. There's always questions. We can never know all that there is needed to know. There's always questions coming up. There's always uh, theories being posed, but there's always new information coming forward that are changing things, changing our perspective, like classic science. If you're talking physics or the physical world, there was a belief that matter resided in something. All matter resided in this stuff called ether, right? And we were an ether-based existence, right? All matter existed or was influenced by ether. And then quantum physics came along, right? And that blew old or classical physics, classical science out of the water, right? Everything is a particle or a wave. We have to look at the subatomic level, right? The atom, right? That type of thing. So, anyways, for instance, am I hiding something in my argument to avoid facing something unpleasant about myself? Probably. Am I protecting my group? There you go. Well, violating the rights of those outside of my group, right? That's kind of what I was talking about or inferring. Am I being narrow-minded, hypocritical, cowardly? Oh, those are good ones, right? Hiding some evidence while presenting a slick and convincing argument. Now, yeah, you can be a great arguer and be and shortchange people and be immoral and unethical and all that good stuff. And it's difficult because in order to prove your point, you can give all the data and facts and evidence that you want. But unless people can actually take some time, look up what you're talking about, look up the facts, look up the research, look up the data, look up whatever it is that you're talking about, you're using to base your argument in, unless they can spend some time with it and confirm it themselves. How do they know whether or not what you're talking about, what you're giving them is accurate or true, right? That's one of the problems, right? And some people, the I don't want to say the best argument, maybe the craftiest arguers, the sneaky ones, uh, know that, right? And they'll use that to their advantage. That's not good. Don't do that. In short, the easiest and most accessible approach to arguments and the argumentation, the approach that gives us the most leverage is through the explicit tool of critical thinking. There it is, right? So that the tool of critical thinking is at the foundation. It is the strong arm element that is to be used whenever you're arguing. Right? Finally, while critical thinking tools are essential to high-level argumentation and the disposition to develop reasonable arguments and to be persuaded by reasonable arguments is important. Argumentation is only one part of life. I got to do a lot more with argumentation. This chapter, this stuff, maybe I'll do a whole book on argumentation. I need it. I'm getting a little weak. I haven't taught argumentation in a while. I do it through critical thinking, but I got to get back to the hardcore argument stuff. Yeah. So maybe that's the next thing I'll do. There you go. Therefore, argumentation cannot consume or be equated with critical thinking. No. Rather, argumentation, again, is a natural human thought process. Somewhat like comparing, contrasting, deciding, and explaining, all of which require criticality to be of high quality. Analyzing the logic of a given argument. I don't know if I want to get into this or how much depth. They probably have an example in here. I don't want to get. This is something that I would have to get into. I mean, I can't give it the focus and commitment that I need to, just through, one chapter. So I'll do a summary, kind of just go over this as an overview, but I'm not going to go into it in any depth. Take apart and examine an argument using the elements of reasoning you have already learned. So this is like an exercise, right? So for example, right, you can learn the ideas or the concepts in the abstract, but in order to see them in a concrete way, you need examples, right? I explain critical thinking to my students and blah, blah, blah. Critical thinking is basically, if you want to break it down through the core essentials, it's you've got a problem, you analyze that problem. There it is, the key word, analyzing. You analyze that problem. You look at what you know, existing knowledge, data, facts, research, whatever, and then synthesize that with what you need to know in addition to what you already know, right? Then you mull that over. You do your questioning and your looking and reasoning out things, your reasoning things out. And then you come up with some type of judgment or conclusion. What do? My car's not working. I bring it in, I hook it up and analyze it. I know from my experience that this is the problem, that's the problem, da, da, da. But there's also something else going on here. I'm not too clear. Let me go to the technical manual. Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with that issue or part of the problem. So ultimately, and also let me talk to an expert on that issue and maybe something else that I was questioning here and see what they have to say. All right, I got all that together. And then, maybe ask them their opinion. What do you think I should do? You get all that. Now you work it out. Okay. I got their opinion and all that good stuff. And what am I going to do? What do I want to do? I want to do what they suggested or something a little different, right? And then you make a judgment. So, ultimately, what do I do? So that's kind of what the process is in a simplified overview fashion. Once you have done this, you can evaluate the author's reasoning and argument using intellectual standards. Go back to page 229. Here's a guide to follow as you move through each element of reasoning. The main purpose of this argument, right? Here you're trying to state accurately as possible the author's intent in writing the argument, right? The key question that the author is addressing in the argument is, right? Your goal is to figure out the key questions that was in the mind of the author when she developed the argument. The most important information in the article, identify the key information the author used or presupposed, supposed beforehand, right? And the argument to support his or her main inferences. Here you're looking for facts, experience, data, so forth, right? The main inference in this argument, or main inferences, right? You want to identify the most important conclusions the author comes to. Key concepts we need to understand in this argument are what? Right? To identify these ideas, ask yourself, what are the most important ideas you would have to know to understand the author's line of reasoning? So you can see there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. And to me, going into this now, it would turn this, what's supposed to be one session or hour or less, into many, many hours. So maybe I'll make a promise to you that I'll do argumentation down the road. Main assumption underlying the author reasoning argument are, ask yourself, what is the author taking for granted? There you go. The assumptions are generalizations the author does not think of, right? If we accept the line of reasoning in this argument, completely, partially, some important implications are what? What consequences are likely to follow? People take the author's argument seriously, right? So climate crisis, what does that mean? So if we don't do something, and I'm going to ask the person who's bringing the argument to bear, there is a climate crisis, right? So I'm asking you, climate crisis believer, what does that mean? If you want me to join in and be a part of the solution rather than opposing your possible solution, then I really got to understand. So try to help people understand. Don't always just smash, you don't believe it, jerk. That's not the point. It's not about, are you 12? Are you an adult or are you 12? So, yeah, I want to know, inquiring minds want to know, ultimately, what does that mean, climate crisis? Um, what's going to happen? When's it going to happen? How do you know? With what level of assurity, right? And if we're really sure, maybe with a preponderance of evidence, or like in a court of law, in order to prove one's guilt, there has to be a preponderance of evidence, right? And if you're 70, 80% sure, then you're probably going to go with a guilty verdict, right? So I want to go, guilty or not, is the climate actually warming up to a crisis level wherein you tell me 10, 20, 40, 50 years, and with what accuracy? You can't just say, yeah, for 50 years, no doubt about it. Who are your sources? And then look at the sources who say 50 years and whether or not they've been accurate about other predictions, right? How accurate or thorough or knowledgeable are they in coming forth with conclusions, right? So there's way more to it than most people believe, and we just don't have enough people who think thoroughly, who think to a great effect, who think who are open and giving and moral and ethical and willing to really just stop, be patient, listen to the other point of view, listen to the possibility or possibilities that you may not know. You may not have all the information. Maybe there's more that people need to know, and you've got to find out what those um, answers are to those questions. Follow through, follow up. If we fail to accept this line of reasoning, some important implications are what? What consequences are likely to follow if people ignore the author's argument, right? That's kind of where I was going, what I was talking about. The main points of view presented in this argument are the main questions you are trying to answer. Here is what, and then you've got those questions, right? And both of those yourself. Evaluating an author's reasoning within an argument. Identify the author's. I'm not going to read through all of this stuff, right? We'll just look at the key points here. Identify the author's purpose in the argument. Identify the key questions the argument attempts to answer, right? Identify the most important, the most important. It's always key, most important, right? Identify the most important information presented. Identify the key question, right? Identify the most fundamental. See, again, right? It's not really an absolute. Uh, you know, Identify the question the argument attempts to answer. Well, there's not one question it answers. It actually answers some questions, leaving other questions unanswered. But those questions that are left unanswered, well, we can leave these over there because it's not that important. They're not key. But some of the key questions are 1, 2, 3, 4. See what I'm saying? So when you have complex issues, very rarely are you going to deal with absolutes, right? Here's the question. No other questions involved. Or here's the 4 key questions. There's no other questions, right? Or here's the most important information. There's no other relevant information. There's no other information. Well, there is other information. Some of it's relevant, more relevant than not, right? So it's hard. It's difficult, right? Identify the assumptions used in the argument. That's huge, right? What do you assume? What's being assumed? Identify the most important. How many times do they say that? Most important inferences in the conclusion of the argument. Look at, only most important, most fundamental, most important, key, right? Again, in complex arguments, and you're not going to argue something that's simple, right? Gravity exists. I argue that gravity exists. Here's the proof. I'm done. It's not going to be something simple that you're going to argue about. Grass is green. I argue that the grass is green. Really? Okay. Identify the author's point of view. Right. Okay. Identify implications. Okay. Yeah, I definitely have to do uh, maybe several. I don't know if I want to do like 20 videos on argumentation, but maybe two or three, maybe a couple. Right. Are we done? Okay. Have I exhausted everything? Right. So there it is. That's argumentation, but man, a lot more there than meets the eye. I need to probably go over some, yeah, maybe go into it in more depth, maybe go over these things that were discussed in chapter 11 in more depth in another video. And then the second video do like examples, right? That might be the best way to treat it. All right, so that wasn't too painful, but I think we're done for now. So that's it. Have a good one. Take care.